You're listening to the Drawing the Ideal Self podcast, episode 23 for April 2022. So today's episode is going to be thinking about holidays and what it is that we are doing with them, why we want them maybe, but in PCP terms. I was looking around for a paper on holidays and found an interesting one by Beverley Walker, and it's called Travelling. We don't call it travelling, we call it living. It's a paper about what happens when we travel and what we might be doing. I'll put the details in the show notes in case you want to find it, although it might be quite tricky to find because it's actually in a book of collected papers from a conference. So when I was thinking about this, the reason it was prompted is I actually had a holiday. My son lives in Thailand and we were due to go there just as the pandemic began. So it had to be put off, and it's been put off 2 or 3 times. Anyway, we went, but it made me very conscious of what we were missing. And I remember during the pandemic, there were times that were absolutely painful when we couldn't go anywhere at all. And, the desire to go on holiday was pretty extreme for a lot of people. So it shows that holidays are extremely important to us. Whether we like them or we don't, they're going to be something that we talk about with other people. And I work a lot with children and young people with autism and sometimes with adults with autism. And some of them really dislike holidays, which is, unusual compared maybe with the general population. And that got me thinking about what would happen if I never went on holiday again. What would my life be like? Those holidays provide a contrast to my life, which is why some of the young people with autism hate them. What they would prefer to have is same rather than different. And often holidays are a version of a holiday that maybe I wouldn't count because I want to go somewhere different. So families have found when they've got a child with autism, sometimes they can go away, but they need to go to the same place or the same kind of place, and they need to stick to their routines. I've met many young people who like to go to bed at the same time, they like to get up at the same time, they like to eat the same food, and holidays in another country pose a lot of difficulty with that. And also holidays where there may be things going on that they don't want to partake in because they're very sociable. So I've known families who go to very sociable places like caravan parks with loads of activities for kids, and their child takes part in none of them. But they like going in the caravan because the caravan can be a kind of version of home. They can take their own pillow, they can take their own bedding, they can eat the same food, they can keep to the same routines. So they have enough familiarity around them, but they're not seeking, I suppose, the adventure angle of a holiday. That can be very frustrating for parents if they don't feel the same and they would like to have those kind of breaks from ordinary life and experiment with things. I think one of the things that's perhaps obvious that happens on holiday is that we are taking a holiday from our usual roles. So you might be in the role of parent, and your parenting on holiday is different from your parenting at home. I mean, certainly when we'd taken our children away when they were little, what they were allowed to have at what time of day to eat was a different thing for them. What time they went to bed was a different thing. So we became holiday parents in a way that we wouldn't be able to sustain at home because there are other things that have to happen. We have to go to work, have to go to school. So those things shape the day. And when you're on holiday, you don't have any of that. So you're able to have a routine, which is your holiday routine, if you like. If you go on holiday with your family, you're going to be taking more of your family's construing with you and more of your relationships with you. So that you'll be able to keep things more the same. The contrast to that might be you go on holiday entirely alone, in which case nobody knows you and you can be whoever you want to be. And that gives people an opportunity to do really big experiments. And I think one of the things from the paper is that it's very clear that a holiday is a time you can experiment. You can be a different you on a holiday because you know it's going to end. So you may have a week or 2 weeks or a short break kind of holiday, but you know you're not going to sustain that. And that got me thinking about holiday romances and what happens with those, and how people who are already in relationships at home may have a holiday romance that they have no intention of it having any impact on all of the rest of their life. It's just for that week or 2 weeks when they're away. So holidaying from roles might mean that you can experiment with a different role. So if normally you are a parent and you go away without your children, you're then able to experiment in a way with yourself as the person you might like to be. So I've known people go on holidays where they are learning something. So that it might be a cruise, but on the cruise there are lots of arts courses. So they'll try out watercolour painting or drama or all sorts of things. I always think those cruise ships are quite interesting because they're like a sort of town in themselves. So if you're on your own, you can deliberately choose things to experiment with. You can decide everything for yourself and you don't have any constraints on that other than the place that you're at. And you might become extremely aware of all the new construing that you're doing. When we were in Thailand, I was thinking about the photos that I took, and I wish now that I'd taken a completely different set of photos that give me a feel of what Thailand was like, rather than the photos of the sights and, the most important things that people might go to Thailand for. I wish I'd taken just like the ordinariness of the fact that there aren't many pavements in places and there are scooters everywhere and the trees are different, and the way that you can have trees on the beach, which is a very rare thing in this country. So if a holiday gives you an opportunity to extend your construing of yourself, that might determine where you choose to go. That you may decide to go somewhere completely different from where you live, or somewhere that's got a lot of similarity, it seems, to somebody else, but you're looking for contrasts that other people maybe don't notice. So people might holiday in the same country that they live, but they feel like they've had a really different experience from their usual everyday life. And that might happen particularly if people go on a sort of activities holiday. So if you went kayaking and you were kayaking every day, whereas normally you wouldn't be, you will have a different experience of a holiday where you've changed role, and for that period of time you've become a kayaker, and that gives you a new sense of yourself. And I was thinking about that sometimes we go on a holiday which will define our construing of ourselves in a way that we want to experiment with. So it might be something like that, or you go on a climbing holiday, or you go on an art holiday. And at the end of it, you've brought back something which is a stronger sense of self with regard to that activity. So you've been experimenting in a very particular way. Rather than experimenting with place, you're experimenting with yourself and who you want to be and maybe what you can carry on with. So you might go on a kayaking holiday and then decide you're buying your own boat. Or you go on a kayaking holiday and you think, I'll never do that again. It was terrifying. Or it was cold and wet and I didn't like it. Another area that will really change on a holiday, potentially, is your construing of relationships. So you might go with, say, a new partner, and everything's been going fine in your relationship, but you haven't had a holiday together. And when you do, you discover a new side of that person that you didn't really expect, or has surprised you, or some of the things that may have concerned you a little at home become very obvious when you're on holiday. So if you were somebody who, let's say, liked to eat out a lot on holidays, but you go away and you find that your partner really doesn't like doing that, and they don't want to go to restaurants all the time, but they want to cook for themselves. Part of your construing of holiday may have included the eating out a lot, and part of their construing of holiday might have been different and not include the food. You end up with different construing that you become very conscious of. That kind of holiday experience can really lead to a breakdown in a relationship. And that's also the same if you go away with friends, that, being with friends when you're visiting each other at each other's houses or going out with them and going home to your own place to sleep is not the same as going on holiday with them. So you will find things about your relationships that are different, and the way you live your lives are different, and some of the conversations about what matters to you and how important certain things are or aren't will come to the fore. And those things could break a relationship. And perhaps that's part of the reason that relationships don't always survive if you meet somebody on holiday, because you're in your I'm on holiday mode. And some of the construing that you do normally at home, you've kind of left behind for now. So you can sort of have a little holiday from your construing and allow yourself to experiment. And I keep thinking it's a bit like a Kellyan fixed role therapy. A holiday experience is time limited. So you can afford to experiment with construing because you know it's going to come to an end. Whereas if you move to a place, you're going there to live, and what you're building is a different way of life in a new place, very obviously. But it's not a holiday. It's not going to finish. So maybe you do it more slowly. Maybe you do it in a different way if you move to a place to live there. But it's not the same as a little kind of dip into a different life. So if you go away with friends, you may discover things about the way they live their daily routine that you had no idea about before you were sharing, say, a house with them. And then you discover that actually there's many differences that you weren't conscious of. And perhaps it would have been better not to know about those things. Or maybe it doesn't matter at all, and they're things that are delightful. So there is a risk attached to going away with other people. Well, I suppose what you learn to do is know who you can go with and how long you can go for and where you could go. So there might be certain people that you could go away with to another country and really explore the place and explore what you're doing. And then other people that you would only go for a short break in the country that you live in because you feel that will suit your relationship better. I guess the length of the holiday is quite important. So if you're going for a weekend break, maybe 2 or 3 days, your ability to leave behind your usual construing of yourself is more limited. Probably partly because you're going to have to go somewhere nearer home. But even if you go away, it's a very short time. If you go away for 6 months, you've got a completely different sort of experience. And having that extra time might mean you learn a lot more about wherever you're visiting. So you can take your time to get to know it. Whereas if you go for a short period, you can only do kind of the main sites and think about those. What you can't do is get a feel of what it might be like to be living there. In Beverley Walker's paper, she was talking about travel being often hard work, so that we're faced with puzzles that we cannot solve. And she says the simplest, apparently everyday things become an effort. Our predictions of the most mundane things are awry. I think that's interesting because if you go to somewhere that's very different from where you usually live, your ability to know what's going to happen next or what the possibilities might be for you is going to be limited by particularly whether you can speak the language or not and how you can find out what there is. So you may not speak the language, but everybody else speaks the language you speak, so that's okay. So in Thailand, loads of people speak English. That was easy for us. But I was thinking about if we weren't able to speak to people, how much more difficult everything would have been. So when you read a menu in a restaurant, if they don't have your own language there, how do you know what you're ordering? Now, at least, the opportunity to look it up on the internet and use Google Translate or something similar to find out what things are. But it's still pretty difficult. So Walker suggests that To minimise the anxiety, fear and threat, people can adopt various strategies. One is to read as much as possible about the place before they go to increase the degree of predictability. Another is to go on an arranged tour or with a well-travelled, well-organised companion who preferably speaks the language, so someone else deals with the unpredictabilities. We stay in good hotels when in places that are most likely to assault the senses and dilate our systems. These could be seen as examples of controlled elaboration. She also talks about using cameras and video recorders to record our experiences of holiday and then to look at them in the kind of safety of our own home, when maybe at that point we're more able to take in our experience and think about it in a safe kind of way rather than when we're actually present. On the whole, she says, travel is in a very real sense an aggressive activity. We are actively extending our construing system, or at least some of us regard it in that way. So, that is using the Kellyan idea of aggression, which is not the same as the layperson's idea. It's about exploring things in a deliberate way that makes sense to our sense of self. She goes on to talk about returning home from a holiday. So she says, much of what is crucial about the effects of travelling only comes to pass on our return home. Some people come home and resume the life they had left off, with little change. In some cases, this may have been a slot rattle, but for many, perhaps most, there are more fundamental changes, many of them totally unexpected. Exploring this phenomenon tells us more about how construing changes. She goes on to say, for many, the return home results in a consolidation of identity. Frequently, this entails coming home convinced that one's life is the best option available. But for others, particularly those who have been away for some time, things can never be the same. Sometimes when you go on holiday and you come back home, your own life can look very different from when you left. You've learnt something new, you've construed some more things, you've developed constructs that you didn't have before you went on your holiday. And that can be either very refreshing and help you to see different things in life, or it can be very disappointing if you look at the life that you've got and you find that actually it's not satisfactory in some way. And I guess that's what happens sometimes with people whose relationships break down after holidays, that they come back to the reality and they've enjoyed the being away feel, sort of holiday romance or something like that. But it doesn't stack up when they're in their normal life. So if you're about to book a holiday, just have a think about it in PCP terms. Think about what it is that you're hoping the holiday will do for you as a person. Not just do you fancy going to New York, but why would you fancy going to New York? What will New York do for your sense of self or for your sense of others? Is it about the place? Is it about the experiences you want to have whilst you're there? And just if you can consider it in advance, you can make sure that your holiday is going to live up more to your expectations. But also, it'll be interesting to see when you review afterwards, would it be the same? Have you done what you set out to do on that holiday? And I do think the journey to and from holiday is helpful in making those transitions from one part of your life to another. So if you go on a journey in a car, you can look at the scenery and see it changing, and that helps you to anticipate the place that you're going to. So say if you're driving from the UK to Switzerland, gradually it becomes more mountainous. And then you have the feeling of, we're reaching Switzerland. And that enables you to anticipate what's outside and to gradually move into it. Whereas if you go on a plane, you arrive in a place to a completely different culture. That transition is actually quite important because you want your transition to a holiday to be comfortable. And one of the things that did strike me is how similar most airports are. It doesn't matter what country you're in. You will have the brands. It makes them pretty boring to look around now. The brands of designer goods will be the same wherever you go. Um, Makes it very quick to go to the shop because I think I can't afford any of those things. I don't want them anyway. But it also means that you have a more comfortable journey because your construing isn't jarred along the way. You can still walk around the shops and there'll be a shop selling perfume, there'll be a shop selling booze, there'll be a shop selling chocolates and things like that, or whatever the local things are to eat. And then there'll be some cafes. And now, there's global branding of cafes. So you can still go anywhere in the world and have whatever coffee you have at home. And you know how to deal with the menu. So that makes that kind of airport experience a bit easier. Okay, so what I'd invite you to do is, before you go away, have a think about what you think that holidays could do to your construing. And maybe have a think about, are there any kind of areas you need to watch out for? So if you're going with friends, have you thought about everything you might need to think about in terms of how you're going to get along wherever you're going? If you're in a relationship and this is your first holiday, have you tried to predict enough so that it's more comfortable when you get there? And just see what happens. And then when you come back, have a think again about, okay, how did that pan out? Did it fit with what I expected or not? And that's a kind of interesting experiment to do with your construing. Because if you do it when you're aware of it, what you'll be thinking about is, okay, how does this fit? And what you're looking out for is all the stuff that's to do with how we construe and make sense of things and the little experiments that we do every single day to see what happens. It'd be interesting if people did a sort of, this is what I predict for my holiday, and then afterwards see how that fits and whether that's okay. Because it may be you predicted X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z didn't happen at all. But that doesn't matter. Or you predicted X, Y, and Z and they didn't happen, and that's really disappointing. So have a go and see what happens. And I'll see you next month. Bye.